For the past couple of weeks, hikers along the Appalachian Trail here in Virginia warned each other about another hiker who had threatened them. This latest encounter with that man turned deadly.
The Appalachian Trail is a 2,200-mile marked hiking trail that passes through 14 U.S. states between Springer Mountain in Georgia and Mount Katahdin in Maine. The trail means a great deal to countless people. It's a place where they can experience peace and beauty, but beyond that, it's a place where they're given the opportunity to discover parts of themselves that may otherwise remain unexplored while in the real world, where attention is often spread far too thin to allow for such deep self-examination. Even for those who never step foot on the trail, just knowing that there are such places to escape to for solitude has value. Unfortunately, however, what must also come with such knowing is the acknowledgement that something you appreciate or even love can and likely will be infringed upon by darkness. We innately understand that this is something that cannot be helped, as there is no true utopia on Earth. Where there are people, there will be aberrations that can be considered to be evil. And those evil aberrations, with their lack of concern for others and their dysfunctional, malformed belief systems, have disruptive behaviors that will affect any atmosphere far more than those who pass through it humbly. Although the deepness of the woods can offer solitude, peace, and perhaps a backdrop for physical or emotional awakening, it may also be perceived as endlessly ominous with the potential to obscure threats to our well-being. Either way, here we encounter one of the scars that will forever mark the beauty of the trail. James Lewis Jordan was a very troubled young man. Prone to erratic behavior and paranoid thought, the more empathic of his friends were often compelled to look after him. One friend in particular, Marguerite Tynan, who'd known Jordan since his teenage years in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, had tried time after time to guide her wayward friend toward professional help. Each time, she watched as he maneuvered deftly to avoid treatment and discontinued prescribed medications when forced to submit to psychological evaluations. The medications, he claimed, turned him into an unfeeling zombie, and they were also a key element in a governmental plot to silence him. Early in 2011, Marguerite came upon Jordan walking aimlessly on a local street and ranting incoherently. She very generously took him in and allowed him to live with her and her boyfriend. Jordan admitted to them that he'd recently been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but again refused to take the medication he had been prescribed. During the months he stayed with them, Marguerite and her boyfriend were bombarded with conspiracy theories, and even accused of personally taking part in the incineration of corpses on behalf of the government. James Jordan was clearly delusional, and the insistence with which he avowed his thoughts and fears pressed disturbingly on those who cared enough to be around him. He believed that he could see things the rest of us couldn't see, and know things we couldn't possibly know. These things existed on a hidden plane beyond a hidden door, as he explained it. When he spoke of these things, his pupils would dilate and he would become distant, detached from this world. Marguerite referred to this indistinct place that her friends so often slipped away to as the shimmer. James Jordan referred to himself as the captain of the hit squad and eventually as Sovereign when he reached the Appalachian Trail, but only he could have any conception of what those words meant in relation to his life. In reality, for certain, he was neither. As a child, Jordan lived in low-income housing with his mother and younger brother in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. He never really knew his father, who died of a drug overdose when Jordan was just 6. His mother, Dale Ann Wilds, had a problem with alcohol and was not an attentive caregiver. Jordan would often stay at friends' houses for extended periods. The parents of those friends generally considered him to be sweet and sensitive at the time, simply in need of proper guidance. Without this needed guidance, Jordan began drinking and smoking marijuana when he was still a child. Just as he entered his teens, he was arrested for breaking into a car and was prosecuted in juvenile court. Neighbors recall the bellicose arguments that took place between Jordan and his mother in their apartment. She could not control him, but she also made little effort to get her son any form of clinical treatment for his ills. When Jordan was about 16, he accompanied his mother when she chose to move to Winooski, Vermont. Their intense arguments, as well as his defiant and delinquent behavior, continued in their new apartment. He regularly ran away, burglarized homes, and used drugs. According to his younger brother Dustin, he would trash their apartment regularly and refused to seek help for his issues. He was, and is to this day, insane and just a terrible person, Dustin said. He claimed that their mother tried and tried with Jordan, but there was, quote, only so much you can do before someone becomes a lost cause. When Dale felt that her son had reached that point of hopelessness, she bought him a tent and threw him out of the apartment. Jordan walked the streets and sold drugs for a time, hovering between Cape Cod and Vermont, with a strong hatred for the world growing in his heart. Strange behaviors began to manifest in him during this time. He would become fixated on escape routes from wherever he was at a given time, or on the idea that strangers were talking about him. He was quick to frustration and anger, confused by his own inexplicable tendencies and the lack of composure and insight to work them out for himself. At 22, police found Jordan talking to himself as he lay on the floor of a Days Inn. He had piled all of his belongings on a table in the room and refused to check out. He was arrested on this occasion for being in the possession of over a pound of marijuana. He pled guilty to the charge and would spend a few days in jail for the offense. Upon being released, Jordan returned to the home of a friend whose mother had taken him in a few years back and began spouting off nonsensically about paranoid thoughts he was having that involved gods and devils. The woman and her husband took him to the University of Vermont Medical Center for treatment. However, he soon signed himself out of the voluntary facility and struck out again on his own. In the summer of 2011, Jordan began hitchhiking his way south to Florida, then proceeded across country to California. Along the way, he slept outdoors in the wilderness and felt free. This freedom, however, also applied to his episodes of paranoia. When he was forced to return to Cape Cod for lack of financial means in mid-2013, he was arrested 3 times in Barnstable County. On the first occasion, he was found staggering shirtless down the middle of a highway. When police approached him, he fled while screaming incoherently. Becoming belligerent, he was eventually pepper sprayed and subdued. The second instance occurred very shortly thereafter when he was at Cape Cod Hospital being evaluated. He physically fought with staff, convinced that they were attempting to give him a lethal injection. As hospital security was escorting Jordan to an observation room, he broke free and entered the radiology department, where he destroyed the contents of a supply closet. 3 staff members attempting to restrain him were injured in the process. A day later, he was arrested again for open and gross lewdness and disorderly conduct after walking naked through people's backyards near Cape Cod Airfield. Police located him along Route 149 with only a sheet wrapped around his shoulders. He wrote on Facebook shortly after this trio of arrests, quote, "Extreme apathy and empathy has pushed me on the edge of existential nihilism. The wolf in me barely has tears left and is close to empty." Expressing deep inner conflict and emotional exhaustion, he hints here at perhaps being close to a breaking point of some kind. Jordan was ordered by a court to undergo a psychological evaluation. He was found to be competent and placed on pretrial probation. Unsurprisingly, he stopped reporting to probation within a year and a warrant was issued for his arrest. The warrant stood for nearly 3 years before being canceled when he finally made contact and recommitted to following the rules of his probation. Only a week later, however, a new warrant was issued when Jordan failed to comply with those rules. This warrant would remain open as Jordan fled to Florida. Not long after arriving in Florida, Jordan was arrested and convicted for stealing food from a Publix grocery store. He again fled and did not show up for his court date. At this time, he joined company with a nomadic group that held regular gatherings in forests around the country. He remained on the move, playing his guitar on the streets for money. In February of 2019, Jordan and his dog Felicia attended a gathering in Ocala, Florida. The Rainbow Gathering, as it was called, was a congregation of travelers to celebrate peace and love. Jordan was deep into another bout of paranoia at this time. He was convinced that his food was being dosed with research chemicals, and he feared being physically attacked, which caused him to become confrontational with almost everyone he encountered. He was so far gone, a young woman who'd spent some time with him at the gathering would later say. Weeks after the gathering, Jordan received a text message from his brother. Their mother was dying of lung cancer, and he was needed at home. His cruel and dismissive response to Dustin was, quote, "It's shitty. Have a nice life." Their mother would pass away on March 2nd, 2019, and Jordan would not be in attendance at her funeral. By April, Jordan had found his way to the Appalachian Trail in Tennessee, roaming aimlessly with only Felicia, a knife, marijuana, and alcohol, and a tarp he used for shelter. It was clear to all he encountered, due to his behavior, that he was not actually hiking the trail. He was there merely to menace people, to express the hatred he felt for the world. A man with the trail name of Honest Abe was immediately unsettled by Jordan, saying that, quote, "There was just an eerie feeling about him. He drew graffiti on the walls of trail shelters, damaged or destroyed the register books there, and threatened hikers who attempted to share the shelters with him, often chasing them away with a camping shovel. He told a couple hiking with their dog that he would rip the dog's legs off and eat them. And he chased another group of hikers, warning them that he was, quote, off his meds. One hiker who did share a shelter with Jordan for a night said, quote, "He was all around us. We knew as soon as we strolled into camp that this guy was going to be trouble. When he was around, we all stuck together." On April 21st, hikers reported Jordan loitering and behaving strangely at a trailhead. He was stopping people and demanding the password required to get on the trail. The next day, he initiated verbal arguments with several more hikers. Via word of mouth, social media, and online forums, hikers warned each other about Jordan, who they knew only by the trail name of Sovereign, the man roaming the trail aimlessly, behaving erratically, and eventually threatening people with a massive knife. After days of hikers being harassed and threatened, the police were called in to deal with Jordan. Unicoi County officers arrested him on April 22nd and confiscated his 17-inch knife. He provided them with a false name and birthday when questioned and was clearly under the influence of something at the time. He was charged with criminal impersonation, public intoxication, and possession of marijuana. But after being released on April 25th, Jordan returned quickly to the Appalachian Trail. This was all that could be done, according to Unicoi County Police, as the hikers who had filed the complaint against Jordan refused to press charges and would not return to court to further the proceedings. Matthew Norman, an avid hiker and owner of the Well-Trafficked Hiker Yearbook website, met with Jordan on May 3rd, when he decided to seek him out after reading several disturbing reports of a man threatening hikers on the trail. He was able to tempt Jordan away from the trail with the promise of a free meal. While Jordan ate a hamburger at Bob's Dairyland in Roan Mountain, Tennessee, Norman was quickly able to deduce that Jordan was deeply troubled and in need of professional help. Jordan told him about a mission he was currently on to, quote, protect the mountain people from the infiltrators trying to steal their instruments. After speaking with him for some time, Norman was able to persuade Jordan to return home. He drove him to Johnson City, where he purchased him a one-way bus ticket back to Massachusetts. He watched as Jordan boarded the bus with Felicia. Unfortunately, he and his dog would get off the bus at the next stop. At about 1 a.m. on May 5th, Mike Brown, the owner of a C-Mart in Bristol, Tennessee, was filling the gas tank of his white pickup truck when he heard the sound of a can being kicked behind him. When he turned, he saw Jordan, who was dressed in camouflage clothing and carrying a military backpack, a fishing pole, and a guitar. He had Felicia with him as well. Brown believed Jordan to be a veteran due to some of the tattoos that were visible on his arm. Jordan tells him that he'd just been behind the store searching the dumpster for something to eat. Kindly, Brown goes into the store and retrieves a sandwich and a bottle of water for him. As Jordan ate and continued speaking, Brown became increasingly uncomfortable in his company. Jordan mentioned to Brown that he was a member of a special force and that he was a suburban assassin. Apparently, his target drove the same kind of large white pickup truck that Brown was driving. When Jordan added that he had to kill his target in order to, quote, open 2 gates and start the situation up, Brown went into the store and called the police. 2 officers showed up to find Jordan lying on the ground with his dog in front of a nearby nail salon. He told them that he'd been joking about what he said to Brown. Police did not believe him to be under the influence of any illegal substances, so they informed him that he was on private property and would need to vacate. He was slow to leave and was still there when the officers pulled away. Mike Brown would later say that he had, quote, the worst feeling about Jordan during their brief interaction. Jordan made his way back to the Appalachian Trail and resumed his belligerent behaviors. A hiker who encountered him on May 10th in Wythe County, Virginia, stated that Jordan told him it was going to be a bad day for hikers on the trail. Ronald S. Sanchez Jr., Ronnie as he was known to his friends and family, was a veteran who'd been traveling the Appalachian Trail as part of an effort to overcome the effects of PTSD and elevate himself from a depth of depression that had all but taken his quality of life from him. In 1995, less than a year after graduating Santiago High School in Garden Grove, California, Ronnie joined the Army as a means of bettering his life. He was deployed to Iraq in 2003, 2005, and 2007, where he served as a combat engineer. Though primarily working on construction projects and transporting high-ranking military officials around the country, he left the Army in 2011, having sustained lasting damage to both his body and his mind. He was discharged with diagnoses of PTSD and major depression after 17 years of service. Ronnie lived in Missouri after leaving the Army. He would spend days sleeping and nights watching television and playing video games, rarely leaving his home. When he did venture out, he did so during late-night hours in order to avoid having to interact with people. With his physical and mental health declining, Ronnie was in the midst of a deep depression. He was not reacclimating to civilian life, and he was not in an emotional state that would permit him to speak with anyone about it. After about a year, the Oklahoma Department of Veteran Affairs suggested that Ronnie move to Oklahoma City, where they had much to offer in the way of recreational programs and recovery treatment. He took their advice and once there began to open up. He saw therapists who helped him to develop coping techniques that made it easier for him to reintegrate. He moved slowly, proceeding incrementally toward healthier routines, and began feeling better. He started cycling, got involved with dragon boat racing, learned to ride horseback, and reconnected with an old love of his, hiking. His therapist suggested that he locate a hiking group using a social networking app called Meetup. When Ronnie found his group, he jumped into the activity with both feet, hiking with them regularly, frequenting their online forums, and cheering his group members on during long hikes. Coming into his own again, Ronnie's nature was to be kind, caring, and positive. As anyone who knew him might have expected, he was becoming a humble leader to the group. He soon began entertaining the idea of through hiking the Appalachian Trail, meaning hiking its entire 2,200-mile length. In addition to raising veteran awareness, he knew deep down that there was badly needed therapy available to him out on the trail. In October of 2017, he and his group were hiking and camping at the Buffalo National River in Arkansas. It was during this trip that another piece of the puzzle was placed for Ronnie. Here he met Brenda Kelly, and they were fond of one another immediately. After their first date at a Veterans Day hike in Oklahoma's Wichita Mountains, they were officially an item. Ronnie's interest in through hiking the Appalachian Trail continued to grow, and he began preparing for this goal that he was in the process of setting for himself. He researched long-distance hiking gear and the best foods to bring along. He also prepared himself physically by upping his cycling and dragon boat racing intensity. Agreeing to participate in a neurological study that would gauge how long-distance hiking affected individuals with PTSD further solidified his commitment to the task. Getting onto the trail would be significant for Ronnie. Completing the through hike would allow him ample space and time to process emotions, challenge himself, and hopefully work through some of his issues. On January 19, 2019, Ronnie and Brenda spent a night at the Amicalola Falls State Park in Georgia. The next day, they hiked the approach to the Appalachian Trail's southern starting point on Springer Mountain and spent another night together there. Brenda left to return to Oklahoma as Ronnie took his first steps onto the trail. The weather was dismal during the first 2 weeks of his journey, but he was grateful for the experience. Although his physical issues necessitated a slower pace than most aspire to when traversing the trail, Ronnie knew that each step taken brought opportunity for emotional progress. He had rediscovered his love for the boundlessness of the outdoors, and now he was immersed in that boundlessness. He settled on the trail name of Engineer for himself, which he felt was fitting, but when he encountered Kelly and Steve Robinson, they rechristened him Stronghold. Ronnie had shared his reasons for being on the trail with them and spoke about his time in Iraq. They felt the new trail name to be far more fitting for Ronnie, and it stuck. In early March, about 100 miles into the hike, Ronnie's knees were becoming problematic. He took a break from the trail in Franklin, North Carolina, and found his way to the Gooder Grove Adventure Hostel. There, he met Colin Zen Gooder, the owner of the hostel and a former Appalachian Trail thru hiker. After speaking with Ronnie and realizing that he needed to take a somewhat extended break if he was going to complete his hike, Gooder offered him a deal. He could stay there free of charge in exchange for doing some work around the hostel. Ronnie agreed and accepted. Over the next 2 weeks, Ronnie was able to rest and recharge. Gooder was accustomed to veterans stopping in at the hostel during their hikes and was keenly aware of the wounds they were allowing to heal along the way. Ronnie was in a significant amount of physical and emotional pain when he arrived, and he seemed less than confident that he would be able to finish the hike. Gooder was responsive, encouraging Ronnie to take meditative walks to test his legs, and teaching him Tai Chi techniques that would aid him in aligning his knees properly when he hiked. Ronnie left the hostel feeling somewhat restored and continued up the trail, but by the time he reached Damascus, Virginia, he reluctantly decided that he needed to quit. Having covered over 450 miles of trail, Ronnie called Brenda and said that he had to come home. She picked him up and brought him back to Oklahoma. Once home, he spoke with his therapist and went for a few short hikes with his meetup group, but after only 5 days, he was overwhelmed by a need to return to the Appalachian Trail. He believed that he needed to finish the journey he had started. Brenda drove Ronnie back to Damascus, where he spent a few nights at the Woodchuck Hostel preparing himself to continue on his way. While there, he shared a room with a section hiker from Maryland named Bob Walker. Ronnie spoke openly with Bob, telling him about the obstacles he wanted to overcome, and that perhaps if he were able to do so, others might be compelled to find ways of moving beyond their own obstacles. Happy to be back on the trail and feeling reconnected with his purpose, Ronnie hiked and shared shelters with Bob on 2 occasions, before deciding that he would spend the remainder of his nights camping in his tent and telling Bob to go on ahead of him. In Wythe County, about 550 miles up the trail, Ronnie hooked up with 3 other hikers the following day. On May 8, 2019, 28-year-old hiking enthusiast Kirby Morill stops at a roadside restaurant where she picks up a food bag from a fellow hiker. A hungry black bear had run off with her original supply of food earlier that day and stunted the progress of her solo northerly through hike of the Appalachian Trail. Having been a rugby standout at the University of New Brunswick in Canada, where she was celebrated for her toughness, she'd become accustomed to pushing through fatigue, injuries, and pain. Her strong resolve served her well as she took to the trail in March of 2019 and, like a fish to water, covered well over 500 miles in less than 6 weeks. Before leaving the restaurant, Kirby spots a man outside. She retrieves her phone, clicks and scrolls for a moment, then pulls out a piece of paper and scribbles a quick note. She then asks the attendant at the register if she can leave the note there for other hikers who might pass through. The attendant agrees, and Kirby waits for the man to pass before heading out. The note read, quote, "I totally just saw Sovereign heading Nobo, northbound, from the window here. Beware, guys." A few hours later, Kirby encounters Sovereign on the trail. Unable to avoid him this time, she goes out of her way to be civil and agreeable in what she hopes will be a brief interaction. She pets his dog, a pit bull wearing a service animal harness, while the man begins strumming a guitar and loudly belting out lyrics. Kirby says goodbye to the man, who is no longer paying much attention to her, and moves on unassumingly. As she walks away, she texts her husband back home in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, to tell him about her encounter with the man. His response is, quote, "Run away, have fun, please don't get murdered." On May 10th, now about a quarter of the way through Virginia, Kirby selects a location to set up camp for the night along with 3 fellow hikers she'd covered some ground with over the past few days: Ronnie Sanchez and 2 other hikers referred to only as GH and JH. Their cheerful discussion about their experiences on the trail thus far is broken off at one point when their attention is drawn to Sovereign approaching on the trail. They watch as he tosses his belongings down, which curiously do not include a tent, and begins stringing dental floss around some small trees, cordoning off his campsite right there beside their own. Continuing to chat, far more reservedly now as they are aware of the man beside them, talking to himself as he moves about his campsite, Kirby, Ronnie, and their fellow hikers decide to retire to their tents. Sovereign remains awake, however, singing aloud and stomping around as he builds a campfire. Not long after, Kirby and Ronnie's campsite is disturbed by the man bizarrely circling their tents and taunting them. The unanswered taunts soon intensify to sinister threats as he begins telling them that they deserve to die. He threatens to kill them in a variety of ways, including pouring gasoline over their tents and setting them afire. Eventually, the man quiets down, seemingly having retreated into the woods beyond his campsite. Kirby, Ronnie, and their 2 hiking companions speak softly as they collectively decide to pack up and find a different place to camp for the night. Kirby gathers her belongings and breaks down her tent. She loads everything into her backpack, overstuffing it significantly as she quickly readies to leave. Sovereign then returns and resumes his threatening, senseless tirade. GH and JH take off running north on the trail. Sovereign follows them. Watching in disbelief, Kirby and Ronnie see the hikers' headlamps bobbing further into the darkness as the man chasing them yells wildly and gains ground on them. Suddenly, the hikers veer off the trail and turn their headlamps off. The ruckus dies down momentarily. Sovereign then emerges from the darkness and quickly approaches Kirby and Ronnie. Sovereign and Ronnie begin arguing, and before Kirby has time to process what is happening or works out how to intervene, Ronnie falls disturbingly to the ground. Seeing a very large knife in Sovereign's hand, Kirby flees heading south on the trail. She can hear the man's heavy footfalls behind her. She is frustratingly unable to put space between them, due in large part to the 30-pound pack on her back, but she keeps running. Eventually tiring, she turns around to face him. Her backward momentum, coupled with Sovereign's forward momentum, cause her to fall flat onto her back as he falls on top of her. Posturing up quickly, Sovereign immediately launches into a vicious attack on Kirby with his massive hunting knife. She can see very little as it's nearly pitch dark, but she feels the blade slashing and stabbing her skin as she attempts to defend herself. After what feels like hours, he lowers back down onto her and begins striking her in the side of the head with his fist. Unable to move, Kirby holds her breath and stops struggling. She remains as still as she can, and eventually, Sovereign ceases his attack. Kirby attempts, as best she can, to stifle the adrenaline coursing through her body, in addition to the searing pain in her arms, legs, and on her face, as he stands over her for a painfully protracted moment. Hearing his dog barking in the distance, he calls out to her and begins back up the trail. Kirby waits another moment before attempting to stand. When she does, she realizes that her right arm is barely functional, that her left arm is also badly damaged, and that she is bleeding badly from both arms, her left leg, and her face. She quickly gathers her headlamp and glasses, which had flown off in the scuffle, and begins heading south, knowing that there are other hikers camped up the trail in that direction. She knows that something is very wrong with her body as she moves, but numbed to a degree and carried on by a cocktail of adrenaline and fear, she continues. She attempts at one point to patch her leg with duct tape, but the mixture of excessive blood flow and the lack of use of her arm makes it nearly impossible. A few miles up the trail, with blood spurting from her left leg with every step, she finally comes upon a campsite. 2 hikers emerge from a tent, and Kirby pleads with them for help. They assist her in getting to a location a few more miles up the trail from which an ambulance can reach her, and she is driven, then flown via helicopter to a hospital across the state line in Bristol, Tennessee. While receiving treatment, Kirby learns that she has sustained 9 stab wounds and a total of 40 lacerations. The radial nerve in her right arm had been mangled, and severe damage had been done to her leg. Doctors glued wounds on her neck and one of her fingers shut while they worked on her more severe injuries. It would take more than 50 staples and 10 sutures to close the slashes across her face, which had cut to the bone. Luckily, her vital organs had not been damaged. Though she would not require surgery, she certainly had months of physical rehabilitation ahead of her. A fully outfitted tactical team from the Wythe County Sheriff's Department makes their way through the woodlands of Crawfish Valley. They cover 5 miles while tracking an SOS signal they'd been made aware of by a mobile phone service provider hours earlier. At about 6:15 a.m., they encounter a group of hikers who describe a knife-wielding man known by the trail name of Sovereign, who'd been in the area with his dog for the past couple of weeks. Some report having heard distant screams about 4 or 5 hours earlier. While the members of the tactical team gather information from the hikers, a pit bull wearing a service animal harness trots over to them. They follow the dog when she begins in the other direction, noticing that they're moving in the direction of the SOS signal's source, and soon arrive at a campsite cordoned off with dental floss. The man at the campsite has blood on his clothing and a disconnected look on his face. As he is taken into custody without any resistance, the man says, quote, "I'm glad you got here just in time. Somebody was just standing over my head with a rock." Of course, there was no one anywhere near him at the time aside from a couple inside a nearby tent who would soon report that he'd been watching them prior to the police arriving. As a couple of officers begin escorting the man away from the Appalachian Trail, other officers locate a 17-inch knife nearby. A bit further up the trail, they locate the source of the SOS signal they had been tracking. It's a man lying lifeless on the ground with several stab wounds on his upper body. He had apparently managed to trigger the SOS signal on his phone in the melee just before or after the attack that ended his life. Officers are told by Sovereign as they walk him the 5 miles back out of the woods that his name is James Lewis Jordan. For the remainder of the distance to the road, he remains silent, staring straight ahead. He is then transported to Southwest Virginia Regional Jail in Abingdon. On May 15th, Matthew Norman posts a photo on the hiker yearbook of 3 pairs of feet. The caption reads, "These are the feet of the 3 survivors. They are doing well, a little broken but nowhere near defeated. They want to thank everyone in the hiking community for their love and support and let you guys know they are strong. Their collective message to the community is keep going. Keep hiking and stay forever. #ATStrong." The senseless murder of Ronnie Sanchez generated sadness, shock, and anxiety on the Appalachian Trail as authorities shut down about a 20-mile stretch during their investigation of the crime scene. Shortly thereafter, the hiking community in Damascus, Virginia, prepared for the annual Appalachian Trail Days festival. Thousands converged for the 3-day celebration. Those in attendance mourned the loss of Stronghold as they held a vigil in his memory on the first night. Ronnie's ex-wife, Elizabeth, who he had remained good friends with, described him as a man with a huge heart who would help anybody who happened to be in need. She had spoken with him about his Appalachian Trail hike and knew how excited he had been for it. Having been with him during his time in the Army, she couldn't help but address the devastating fact that Ronnie had not died during time spent in a war zone over 3 deployments, but in a place that was supposed to mark the culmination of his road to recovery. Ronnie was an experienced camper, and he was always known to be calm in dangerous situations. He was cautious, never carrying a gun while hiking, only a knife, and he felt safe out there. Those who knew Ronnie were doubtless that he would have done everything he could to de-escalate the situation with Jordan that night, and if his attempts were unsuccessful, he would have done everything in his power to help the other hikers. With all his military service, Ron had already come to grips with the idea of sacrifice, said Colin Gooder. If God had asked for someone to raise their hand to volunteer and save everyone else on the trail from being hurt or killed, Ron would have been the guy to raise his hand. It almost makes sense that it was him. He was that selfless. Gooder, having spoken at length with Ronnie, knew that his suffering had made him more compassionate than most people. It showed in the way he helped others while at Gooder's hostel. Quote, "He had such an effect on those around him that they told me they felt more at peace. The same peace he was searching for along the trail. And here he was bringing it to other people he met along the way." Brenda Kelly, Ronnie's girlfriend at the time of his death, expressed her anger over losing a wonderful man and being left with only her cherished memories of their time together. "I miss him terribly," she said. "We had a future together, and now that's gone." Prompted by the killing and the long chain of online banter about James Jordan that did nothing to remove him from the trail, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy revised their website with the purpose of making the reporting of safety issues simpler. The website now features a bright red 911 button, as well as readily accessible online reporting forms. Representative Brian King indicated that the organization had routinely provided people with safety advice and that they tended to follow it. He then raised the very poignant question as to whether any of it matters when someone has an evil intent, as was certainly the case with James Jordan. "How do you guard against that?" he asked. Because the murder had occurred on National Park Service land, Jordan would be prosecuted in federal court. During his initial appearance in U.S. District Court in Abingdon, Virginia, the judge found him to be incompetent due to his history of mental illness and ordered that he undergo a psychiatric evaluation at a federal facility prior to any further legal proceedings. The only time Jordan spoke at the hearing was when he inquired as to the whereabouts of his dog. Felicia, he was assured, had been taken to a no-kill animal shelter in Wythe County. Almost a year later, on June 11, 2020, Jordan is declared competent to stand trial after the judge reviews the findings of mental health evaluators. 2 weeks later, he pleads not guilty to all charges laid against him in the federal grand jury indictment: 1 count of premeditated murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 3 counts of assault with intent to do bodily harm. Jordan would remain at the Southwest Virginia Regional Jail in Abington throughout legal proceedings. After a subsequent psychiatric evaluation found that he suffered from schizoaffective disorder and concluded that he was unable to appreciate the wrongfulness of his acts when the crimes were committed, Jordan's plea of not guilty by reason of insanity was accepted by a federal judge on April 22, 2021. He was committed to a psychiatric institution, not to be released unless a court of law finds by clear and convincing evidence that his release would not create a substantial risk of injury to anyone else. Kirby Morrill has been guarded when retelling her story in case she is ultimately called on to testify in court. She did say, however, that she was, quote, haunted by Mr. Jordan's actions, and as a direct consequence of his actions, I am also haunted by my own decisions. I watched and listened in helpless near disbelief as Mr. Jordan transformed before my eyes from a bewildered, confused man into a violent animal. I saw him attack and murder a good, kind man, and I remember his eyes when I tried to run and when I looked back over my shoulder. They are burned into my mind. Kirby had initially wanted to get right back onto the trail to finish the remaining 1,640 miles she'd been violently forced to leave unhiked. After her early physical therapy sessions, however, she learned that it would be some time before she would be able to do so. Her recovery was arduous, requiring painful physiotherapy, exercise, and weightlifting to restore as much feeling and function as possible to various parts of her body, especially her arms. She set a more immediate goal for herself at that point. She would climb Mount Katahdin in Maine. Kirby accomplished her goal only 4 months after the attack. During her time at the summit of the mountain, She wept as she finally bid Ronnie Sanchez goodbye. Thank you for listening.
An SOS call that was sent from a phone, and we went up there, and that's where we located the suspect and the victim. We had our whole TAC team up there, so he wisely just surrendered himself.